Welcome into the Fantasy Guides podcast. My name is Andrew Teuscher, and I am joined today by the owner, the operator of Fantasy Guides and FantasyGuides.com, Stephen Rippey, and no one else, normally joined by our spreadsheet wizard, AJ Cleaver, but he's getting married. So Stephen said, yeah, you're not showing up. Your wife will kill you.
Didn't he almost even say, like, I've got the rehearsal dinner, and then I could try to either squeeze it in before or after? And I was like, AJ, like, I order you to not be on the podcast.
You saved his marriage before it even started.
As somebody who's been married for a while, I know where the line needs to be drawn. He doesn't know yet.
He's a wee lad. He'll learn one day. He'll get there eventually. His freedom is no longer his. Sorry, buddy. But you are here today because you're free to listen to our podcast as we go through the rankings this week. Ordinarily, on this podcast, we'd go over it matchup by matchup. We wanted to switch it up a little bit. We're down in AJ anyway. Let's try something new. Instead, we're going to make it succinct and easy for you. We're going to go position by position and talk about the rankings of each section. We'll have them in tiers of like must starts. We'll go through about 6 at a time with the running backs is where we're starting. Then we'll go wide receivers and tight ends and QBs, those listening on YouTube. I'm going to chunk these up into smaller portions so you can consume them much easier that way. Long form podcast, it ain't changing for you. We'll go through them all. So, going through our official Fantasy Guides rankings right off the top, we're going to go through our must starts, our top 12 as ranked by Steven, and then I'll try to poke and prod at these to make him explain himself. Starting with our top 6. I mean, these are pretty ironclad. RB1 of the week, Saquon Barkley. Derrick Henry is his RB2. RB3 is Breece Hall. Then it's Jordan Mason, Alvin Kamara, and Breece Hall at number 6.
Bijan at 6. I think you said
Bijan Robinson at number 6. We're already off to a hot start. Steven, who here is standing out for you?
Well, just looking at the matchups, I know everybody that drafted Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson, they're probably not all that happy right now, but they on paper look like they have the best matchup for any running back this week. Like, it's tempting for me just to say I was right, comes Monday morning. Actually, they play Monday. So Tuesday morning to rank Breece Hall number 1 because the matchup's so good against Buffalo. We've seen them get torched all season. It's just that with Braylon Allen there, it's just not been the Breece Hall show for the most part. But Buffalo giving up the most fantasy points, the third most touches, the most receptions, the most total yards. They're bottom 10 in touchdowns. Like, they are a defense you want to go after. The over-under is not super high in this one, but I'm not too worried about it. So yeah, I think you have to have Breece Hall in your top 5 this week.
You're just looking at the season guide we have, and it's just everything shows incredible matchup against Buffalo. And Steven, you are quite a bit higher than ECR expert consensus ranking, which is a compilation of just a bunch of expert rankings.
It's basically a bunch of fantasy pros guys, right?
Pretty much. It's a bunch of guys that they ask. It's more than just a couple. It's have
crowdsourced.
At ECR 11, so you're 8 spots higher on Breece Hall. You feel good about that. You're not panicking a little bit now.
No, I'm not. Again, these are rankings. So like, if you have Breece Hall, there's very little chance you're not benching him. And I'm just really high on this matchup. And honestly, the same thing for Bijan Robinson. Everything I just said about Breece Hall, you can apply it to Bijan Robinson for the most part as far as the matchup goes. Instead of Carolina being the worst, they're like the second worst in every meaningful running back stat. But again, Tyler Allgeier's there. Like, these guys would be locked and loaded, ranked 1 and 2 if it wasn't for the running back competition. And if we really think about it, Derrick Henry's getting a lot of competition. It's not like he's getting all the work either in Baltimore. So he's got a little bit of competition. Nobody has any qualms ranking him where he is because he's been just amazing. Yeah, I think it is high. But again, you're not benching these guys. So for me, it's just I'm bullish on them because of the matchup.
One last one I have to ask you about, because struggles in the streets, panic everywhere, because the Rattler himself is going to be starting for the New Orleans Saints. Are you still fine with Alvin Kamara? Or are you worried about him going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? They're still, and they're not the favorites, actually. They're underdogs in Tampa.
They're at home. And yeah, I'm a little bit, it's just hard. Where do you put him? Alvin Kamara. Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about the matchup. I don't think he's getting 4 touchdowns like he did a few weeks ago, but Tampa Bay is giving up the third most receptions to the running back position. So when I think rookie quarterback and I think Alvin Kamara, I think that could end up being a lot of receptions. So I think his receiving ability will keep a high floor for him, and he's their best weapon. So I think they're going to use him a lot. I think it's going to make Spencer Rattler's day a little bit easier if they do a lot of dump offs and easy stuff to Kamara.
ECR is right in line with you as well. You guys are not far off from one another. It's just hard to go against the guy who's averaging 73% of the snaps, 67% of the rushing attempts, and 22% target share.
Yep.
Hopefully Rattler's smart enough to check down to the man. All right. Those are the guys who you start them you don't even think about it. You probably aren't anyway. Let's move on to our next chunk of still must starts because they're top 12. At 7 is Jahmyr Gibbs. Then it's Josh Jacobs, Chuba Hubbard, James Conner, Kenneth Walker, and Tony Pollard sneaks into our must-start category there at number 12. Why you got Tony Pollard that high, buddy?
Matchup, and he's been good this year. Like, I still like Tyjae Spears. I think he could still do something, but for the most part right now, they've been using Pollard. Mostly, he's looked good. What's that surgery he had called again, Andrew?
The tightrope?
Yeah, like we've seen now multiple examples of that taking a little bit to come back from. He's back from it. He's getting over 60% of the snaps in every game. He had 22 rush attempts against Miami in the last game he played. They're ramping him up even more so. And I just think the matchup is so good. You're a Colts fan. You know how good the matchup is. They're giving up top 10 numbers in fantasy points per game. They're giving up the most touches, 7th most receptions, and the 2nd most total yards to the running back position. He's a good running back. This is a smash matchup. So yeah, that's why I've got him ranked so high. The only thing that maybe why it could be a little bit high is just Will Levis. How high can he elevate that offense? So I get if anyone wants to knock the ranking for that, but for the most part, he should have a great game.
It felt watching the Colts game that they finally were starting to come around on stopping the pass game a little bit. Now, there was a huge bomb to Brian Thomas, but the Colts just got destroyed on the ground, and it hurt, and it just felt like there was nothing they could do, and there was certainly nothing I could do as I watched in horror on my couch, and I was very sad about it.
Do you try anything? Do you have a ritual, a candle, something, or do you even give it any effort?
Well, I can tell you firstly, I dress myself and all of my dogs and my child and my wife in Colts gear. Hopefully that helps. And then I can tell you whenever that field goal went up to win the game for the Jaguars, I was trying to blow as hard as I could, hoping it'd give a gust of wind to push it off to the side.
Was that game in Jacksonville?
I believe so.
Okay. I was just wondering. I don't know if that would work in a dome, but
that could be a flaw. I'll look into that. Maybe my people, we'll see how we feel about that.
Okay. That sounds good. And then one other one I would say that's probably higher. I don't know if you have ECR pulled up, Andrew, but Josh Jacobs, I got him as the RB8. I really like his matchup this week. I still think he's going to get a ton of volume. I know Emmanuel Wilson, a decent running back, but I still think it's Josh Jacobs' backfield. PFF has this as like a 10 out of 10 matchup rating. Cardinals giving up the 7th most points. They're giving up the 5th most touches to the running back position, and they're giving up the 5th most total yards. So yeah, I think, especially with this being one of the higher over-unders, Green Bay being 5.5-point favorites, I think they're going to use a ton of Josh Jacobs in this one.
You're actually a little bit below where ECR has him. ECR has him at 6, but that's just flip-flopping a couple of guys. So it's not a big deal there. Josh Jacobs is in for an absolute smash matchup. I think he's going to succeed there.
I haven't referenced the ECR, so this is kind of fun, Andrew. I like going off the cuff and seeing how close or how far off I am.
I love adding this mystery part for you. Now, one guy who is an ECR borderline RB1, but you have Chuba Hubbard 4 spots higher than expert consensus rankings. You just think they're going to feed him the rock like he has been all year?
Yeah, when I'm looking at it too, it does seem a little bit high. There's guys I like also, like DeAndre Swift, Chase Brown, that are around him. I actually have him higher than Kenneth Walker. That's partly because Walker plays San Francisco tonight, so it's a really tough matchup. But he is getting all the work. He has looked really good. This offense has looked better. And even at 6.5-point underdogs, I feel like he's going to be the guy on the field. They're not going to put Miles Sanders in passing situations, so he could actually surprise in the receiving game in this one. And Atlanta is giving up the 7th most receptions and touches to the running back position. So again, it's volume, and he's just been so good this year. He's been an RB1.
And we've seen Atlanta be below average at stopping the run. We saw Bucky Irvin ripping off a couple of chunk plays. We saw Rashad White, who we all think is just not great, had a huge 70-yard run, I think is what it was. So, yeah, we could definitely see Chuba Hubbard not only get volume, but also maybe rip off some chunk plays. Anyone else? Go ahead.
He's got an RB4, RB7, and RB8 finish in back-to-back weeks. So there's no reason. This is a similar matchup to the other ones that he's smashed in.
Chuba keeps eating until Jonathan Brooks comes back. Man, my fantasy team needs that so soon. Won't be this week. Anyone else in this section from 6 to 12 that you want to drop a little thought on?
No, I think the other ones are pretty chalky, so I don't think they're worth bringing up.
This is where we start to get a little bit different. And it starts right off the bat with a question. Chase Brown, number 13. Now we're getting into the should starts. Unless somehow you have two of the top 12 guys, you're probably still starting these dudes in our opinion. Chase Brown at 13 against the Giants. Swift against the Jags. Then James Cook against the Jets. David Montgomery against the Dallas Cowboys. J.K. Dobbins against the Broncos. And Brian Robinson against the Ravens. You have Chase Brown at 13. Why so high there? He's been the backup for most of the season. What's your thoughts on that?
I think there's a decent chance Zach Moss doesn't play or is pretty limited in this one. I've heard he had a high ankle sprain. I've heard it's not so bad. I guess he was limited. I guess both running backs were limited this week so far in practice. But I don't know. I think the ankle injury could limit what we see Zach Moss as far as the snaps go. And I just think it's a great matchup. New York giving up the 5th most receptions to the running back position. They are 3.5-point underdogs. So he's just looked really good this year. He's just been very good. So I'm banking on a good offense with a good running back who could potentially get all the work this week.
Riddle me this, Batman. Let's say that Zach Moss gets a couple more limited practices in, and he's going to start this week. What are you doing with Chase Brown, Zach Moss? Are you just flipping Zach Moss into Chase Brown's role? Are you moving Chase Brown down? What are you doing if both backs are a go?
If they're both a go, I still think it's probably more likely that Chase gets more of the work. I think that, he hurt his ankle. I don't think it was like a nothing injury. So I think that there's a decent chance this snap share comes closer to a 50-50. And I trust Chase Brown more with the snaps than I do Zach Moss. He's more efficient with them. He's just been better on the season. So yeah, I would still have Chase Brown, but I might move him down to like back end or more of a mid-range RB2, maybe closer to a back end RB2. The problem is I'm looking at a lot of guys named like Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby in similar type roles. So it's hard to move him down too far. He's just on the better offense.
We're in the weeds of bye weeks and injuries. We gotta start moving guys someplace. And Chase Brown got more carries last week than Zach Moss. I think he is an RB2 to start next week. And no Zach Moss even higher. Looking more into this, are you actually buying into the DeAndre Swift hype? Do you think he's bounced back and is really something? Or is it just the Jacksonville Jaguars start that has you excited?
I did like how last week I said I still thought he was a decent running back, and you made a face, and then I was like, you were high on him 2 years ago, and then he looked pretty good this week. Although his yards per carry still weren't great. He was still 3.5 yards per carry. So I don't think he's not looking as good as he did the first couple of years of to start out his career. Now he was running behind the Detroit Lions offensive line. He was less injured. He has been injured a lot in his career. So I don't know if that zapped some of his explosiveness, but this is matchup. This is the Jaguars giving up the 3rd most fantasy points. They're giving up the 2nd most receptions to the running back position. I mean, he did have a 7 reception game just 2 weeks ago. I don't think that happens again, but if Chicago's coaching staff sees that they're vulnerable, I could see him getting, 3 or 4 catches in this one to go along with a lot of volume. So yeah, matchup's really good. I think he's going to smash in this one.
That's been the strange part about DeAndre Swift's journey this year. Despite some inefficiency and just absolutely terrible fantasy outputs, I mean, he was the RB49, RB29, RB41 through the first 3 weeks. He was still getting a ton of volume. His usage really hasn't changed that much from what it was. He's
It's
still
actually
getting
gone
it
up, though.
It's actually stayed the same. Other than week 3, he's just getting the same amount of usage. I'd have to look into it, see if they're using him differently. He just flipped the switch. Could have just been matchups as well. But man, it looks like he's really doing something different. But we'll see. Keep producing, DeAndre.
Well, and a lot was made of his super inefficiency, which I'm not disagreeing with. But he was given 11 touches week 1. He was given 19 week 2. I mean, he just had 21 rush attempts and 2 targets. Last week, the week before, 16 rush attempts and 7 targets. So his usage has definitely gone up. And maybe now that he's getting a little more, sometimes running backs have to get a little more comfortable. The more usage they get, the more, like in his case, if he's got poor efficiency, it starts to go up with more volume. But yeah, big part of this though is matchup.
Moving on, any other guys in this range that's really standing out to you? I guess let me bring up one more. You are significantly lower on one David Montgomery than expert consensus rankings. The ECR has him at RB8. I would maybe even put him up higher. Massive over-under for David Montgomery, 52.5 in this game, 27.75 implied points. What are your thoughts on David Montgomery this week?
So they've got him where?
RB8 this week.
Okay, well, and I'm looking at it. Excuse me. That would mean I'd have to put him above Josh Jacobs, which I think Montgomery's probably the RB2 on his offense. Would we agree there?
Yes, I just think factually that'd be true.
Yeah, so I think Jacobs is less so in his offense. Both really good offenses. Chuba Hubbard, I mean, he's getting all of the work. All of it. I mean, Miles Sanders might get 20% of the snaps. James Conner, all of it. I think he had all but 1 touch last week. So we know, even though it's a tougher matchup, he's getting all of the work. Kenneth Walker, I could argue maybe Kenneth Walker, where he's going, but Kenneth Walker had, 7 receptions last week? Like, his floor is so high now because he's getting a lot of passes. So it's hard to put him above Kenneth Walker, and Kenneth Walker is just so darn explosive. Tony Pollard, again, he's getting more usage than Montgomery. So it's hard to put him above him because the matchup's so good for Pollard. But I will say, now that I'm looking at Chase Brown, DeAndre Swift, James Cook, some of these guys, I could see going up above those guys, but we're only talking about 3 spots.
I also think we'll see David Montgomery rise in our overall rankings as guys start to drop to injury. Like James Cook, it looks like he probably isn't playing this week. Chase Brown, let's say Zach Moss comes in. Maybe we have to push him down a little bit.
Yeah.
David Montgomery, regardless, still a smash play this week. He's Derrick Henry light. A touchdown every single week. He just had a bye week last week. That was the only defense that could stop him.
Yeah. And guys, make sure you double check these rankings throughout the weekend, because I go through this Thursday morning, maybe get done midday Thursday, and then we talk about it on the podcast. And then I tweak them by Friday, tweak them on Saturday, and then sometimes I even do a last minute tweak on Sunday, just with injury stuff coming in. So this is the initial run through. And just as we talk through this, I can already see myself making changes.
Absolutely. That's why we're talking them out. Again, we had J.K. Dobbins and Brian Robinson also in that range. We didn't talk about them. If Brian Robinson goes, he's just been phenomenal this year. Same with J.K. Dobbins.
I gotta point out one more guy though, Andrew,
yeah.
And I don't even like pointing him out, but Najee Harris does have a good matchup. I have to put him in like Hail Mary territory though at this point. He's just been so bad, but the matchup is there. Like the Raiders, not good against the running back position. They give up the 5th most points. They're giving up the 3rd most receptions. They're top 10 in total yards allowed. Problem is, he just doesn't score any touchdowns. If Najee could get 1 touchdown, one of these games wouldn't look so bad. But he just keeps getting you like 9, 9, 13, 10, 9. They're just mediocre games. But I think if you're desperate at running back, I think you could do worse than him this week.
He should get one in the end zone. We also are going to see Christian Wilkins for the Raiders. Really good, really highly paid defensive tackle for them this offseason. He just hit the IR. He won't be there. That's going to be a huge hole that they're going to have to try to fill. The issue with them is that they've been in negative game scripts these last couple of weeks against Indy, weirdly enough, and Dallas. That's not going to be good for Najee Harris. And he's been getting receptions, 5 and 6 receptions in weeks 3 and 4.
Yeah,
I think he could eventually just explode, he could drop 3 touchdowns in a week if he just gets handovers.
I don't know about explode. He could
touchdown variance.
Like my kids are kind of young, so I get them those little fire crackers that just the sparklers, right? I don't get him like the bottle rockets or anything like that. So it's like he could sparkle. Let's just say that Najee Harris could sparkle this week.
Please sparkle and shine, Najee. Well, Najee's actually our RB19, so that kind of gets us into this next tier of streamers, this next chunk of streamers. Starting at RB19 again was Najee against the Raiders. RB20 is Ramondre Stevenson against the Texans. Then ETN against the Bears. And then Tank Bigsby against the Bears right behind him. Rico Dowdle against the Lions at 23. Rounding out our top 24 is Bucky Irving ahead of Rachaad White against the New Orleans Saints. Talk to me about that one.
He's 2 spots ahead. So it's
way
we're splitting hairs. Overall, I have the 4 spots separating the two. So it's a coin flip between Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. Same with Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby, honestly. You just kind of bunch these guys together, and then I just decided to put Rico Dowdle in between them. Yeah, I don't know. I think Etienne and Rachaad White are the receiving backs now on their teams, and the better running backs between the tackles are Tank Bigsby and Bucky Irving. I think it's very similar backfields there in the Florida region, and I don't love any of them. I don't feel super comfortable starting any of them any given week, if that makes sense.
It's scary. You need some kind of crazy boom long run for Bucky Irving and Tank Bigsby. We have not seen Bucky Irving have a game of 10 plus carries, and Tank Bigsby hasn't been much better in terms of volume, but dude, they just look better than their counterpart. I've been saying it since week 1. Tank Bigsby, I think, is a better running back than Travis Etienne. I went and watched the film. Is Tank Bigsby's a more exciting running back than Travis Etienne? I mean, watching Tank Bigsby, his favorite thing is to see a hole in front of him, think, no, that's way too easy, and then go find a way cooler way to score a touchdown. It's like Kenneth Walker. I love it. Hopefully it keeps up. Maybe we see some sort of flip there.
The only thing with Tank is people that are getting overly excited about him, because I think that there's reason to be excited. 2 career receptions. I think that's very concerning for a running back. Travis Etienne's the receiving back there. I think they're actually similar. I think he could catch passes if the ball was thrown to him, but
he had a 15% target share peak in college. Tank Bigsby did.
Yeah. So they're using Etienne in that role, and that's just doesn't get me that excited about Bigsby.
No. Hopefully something switches. Maybe it'll make our lives easier in the future. But right now it's kind of muddling up that back end of the RB window there for our starts. A guy we're kind of seeing get let loose and maybe become the leader of his backfield, Rico Dowdle, in a really high-powered matchup. He's down here at RB23 for you, might be taking over, but that Detroit run defense is brutal.
Only reason he's not higher, because I watched all of that Sunday night game against Pittsburgh. I had Rico Dowdle as a sit, so I was highly invested in him sucking. And every time he got the ball, I was like, dang, he looks explosive, he looks quick. So he's definitely startable, even though this is a tough matchup. But Detroit giving up the 3rd fewest fantasy points, the fewest touches, fewest receptions, fewest total yards to the position. So that's the worry. Yes, it is a 52.5 point spread. Dallas 24.75 point implied total, which is pretty high. So this is going to be a good game, but I just think it's going to be dink and dunk for him. If he's going to get you any points, it's off little dump offs. And I just don't think the ceiling's that high for him. Like he scored. This was maddening, Andrew. Like I had Dak and Dowdle as starts at Pittsburgh Sunday night, and it was looking good for about 3 quarters. And then Dak throws a touchdown pass, a short one, to Dowdle, and then he scored with time expiring at the end of the game. Dak did. So Dowdle, I mean, he was on his way to an okay game, like 8 or 9 points, and then he got that receiving touchdown, which put him up to close to 19. If he doesn't score a touchdown against the Lions, I think he's probably you're not gonna be happy with the total.
No, but I think it's something we could see going forward being a big trend. 67% of the rushing attempts is what Dowdle got last week. That is by far a season high for him. Zeke's been just meticulously dropping in his rush share. Hopefully our lives are made easier with this backfield. Steven, that gets us through the top 24. Any running backs remaining that you want to highlight, point out, either in a good way or a very bad way?
I think Roschon Johnson, just based on the matchup that I talked about with DeAndre Swift being so good, it's also good for Roschon Johnson. So he had 2 touchdowns last week. I think there's a chance he could get 2 touchdowns this week, in a good matchup. So he's kind of a Hail Mary play that I think, if you're really hurting, I think you could do worse than him. Same for Tyler Algier because of a good matchup, and he's actually getting decent usage. I really like the usage with Javonte Williams. I just hate the matchup. But the Chargers are giving up a lot of receptions to running backs, so I think Javonte could get you, low-end RB2 numbers just off of receptions. And then the only other ones, Justice Hill, because it's a good matchup, I think he could do well. He's been good, spelling Derrick Henry. But one last one is Antonio Gibson. If Ramondre Stevenson, for some reason, misses this game, it's not a great matchup, but Gibson could get a ton of volume in this one. So just something to monitor. If you are needing a Hail Mary, like I am in one league, Antonio Gibson, he could be okay.
That's a ringing endorsement. At some point, man, some of my teams, that's saying a lot. Just that you could do worse. Because, all right, that rounds out all of our running backs for us. Again, long audio podcast. We're going to keep rolling down to receivers. YouTube, thank you for tuning in. Catch our next video.